The unexpected prisoner. Commander Thea Blackwood had always prided herself on staying calm under pressure, but being abducted by crystalline aliens while conducting a routine solar survey definitely tested those limits. The Vraxian ships had appeared out of nowhere, their translucent hulls catching starlight like cosmic diamonds, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "You know," she called out to her captors as they marched her through corridors that seemed to be grown rather than built. "On Earth, we typically start with a hello before taking someone prisoner." The Vraxians, with their geometric forms and faces that resembled cut gemstones, didn't respond. Their crystalline bodies chimed softly as they moved, creating an otherworldly symphony that would have been fascinating under different circumstances. The ship shuddered, announcing their arrival at what Thea assumed was their destination. Through the viewports, she caught her first glimpse of the infamous stellar containment facility. The structure defied conventional architecture, appearing as though someone had captured a nebula and crystallized it. Energy fields pulsed between towering spires, creating a web of containment barriers that would make even the most optimistic escape artist think twice. "Lovely place," Thea commented dryly. "Though the security seems a bit excessive for a simple human scientist." The guard closest to her shifted, facets catching the light in what might have been irritation. Processing involved being scanned by devices that looked like they'd been carved from pure starlight, having her biometrics recorded by what appeared to be a sentient diamond, and being relieved of her equipment. At least they let her keep her uniform. "Commander Thea Blackwood," resonated the chief processing officer, its voice like wine through crystal caves, "you stand accused of trespassing in restricted space and attempting to steal Vraxian technological secrets." "I was conducting an authorized solar survey," Thea enunciated carefully, wondering if perhaps their universal translators were malfunctioning. "Unless you've suddenly claimed ownership of every G-type star in this sector." The chief's facets flashed in what Thea was beginning to recognize as the Vraxian equivalent of contempt. "Your species' very presence in this quadrant is an offense. Your primitive understanding of stellar mechanics cannot comprehend the delicate balance we maintain." "Primitive?" Thea raised an eyebrow. "That's rich coming from a species that still hasn't figured out quantum entanglement communications. But please, continue explaining how humans don't belong in space. You're only the fourth species this month to give us that lecture." Her sarcasm earned her a prod from some sort of crystalline staff that sent tingles through her entire nervous system. Thea decided that perhaps it was time to dial back the commentary, at least until she figured out what these living gemstones really wanted. The prison itself was a maze of crystalline corridors that seemed to shift and change with each passing moment. The walls hummed with energy that made Thea's teeth ache, and guards patrolled with a precision that suggested they were linked to the facility itself. As they approached what she assumed was her cell block, the guard captain, distinguished by its more complex geometric patterns, turned its faceted face toward her. "Silence, human. Where you're going, your species' infamous adaptability won't help you." Thea couldn't help but smile. "Infamous adaptability? Well, that's flattering. Here I thought we were just known for our reality shows and processed cheese." The guard stopped before a massive door that thrummed with enough energy to power a small city. The captain's facets glowed with what Thea could only interpret as smug satisfaction. "Welcome to your new home. Don't worry about getting lonely, we've arranged some special company for you." As the door began to open, Thea caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows beyond. The captain's final words echoed through the corridor as they shoved her through the doorway, "Try not to get incinerated too quickly by the stellar beings. We have a betting pool." "Stellar beings?" Thea muttered as the door sealed behind her with a crystalline chime. "Well, this should be interesting." She turned to face her new cellmates, and her breath caught in her throat. In the vast chamber before her, three beings of pure energy and light hovered, their forms rippling like captive stars. This, Thea thought with a mix of awe and apprehension, was definitely going to be more interesting than her planned solar survey. Wings of Alliance. The stellar beings before Thea were unlike anything she'd ever encountered in her decade of space exploration. The first, closest to her, pulsed with the deep red intensity of an aging star, its form constantly shifting between humanoid and abstract geometries. The second rippled with the blue-white brilliance of a young sun, while the third shimmered in impossible ultraviolet hues that made her eyes water. A human, the red one spoke, its voice resonating directly in her mind. How desperate have the Vraxians become, to place one of your kind among us? Thea straightened her shoulders, maintaining eye contact with what she hoped was the being's face. Commander Thea Blackwood, Earth Space Command. And you would be? The blue-white entity moved closer, its radiance dimming slightly as if trying not to overwhelm her. I am Solarius, once guardian of the Carina Stellar Nursery. Its mental voice carried notes of both youth and ancient wisdom. The one who spoke first is Navera, and our ultraviolet friend is Celestis. Charmed, Thea said, fighting the urge to squint against their collective brilliance. I don't suppose any of you know why our crystalline friends are so interested in keeping stellar beings prisoner. Seems like a rather dangerous hobby. Celestis' form flickered with what might have been amusement. The Vraxians believe they can harness our energy to power their empire. They fear the natural cycle of stellar death and rebirth, seeking to control it instead. Not that their attempts have been successful, Navera added, red light pulsing with obvious pride. Their containment fields can barely handle our passive radiation, let alone our full power. Thea's scientific mind raced with possibilities. Those fields, they're crystalline-based technology, aren't they? That's why everything here looks like it was carved from diamonds. Precisely, Solarius confirmed. The Vraxians believe their crystalline nature makes them superior, capable of controlling the very forces of stellar evolution. They've forgotten that even diamonds can melt. Moving carefully around the chamber, Thea studied the containment field generators. But they haven't actually tried to drain your energy yet, have they? They're still in the observation phase, trying to figure out how. Your species' perception is remarkable, Celestis noted, ultraviolet patterns shifting rapidly. We've been here for what you would call months, waiting for them to make their attempt. Each day, they gather more data, refine their calculations. And when they finally try? Thea asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Either they'll succeed, using us to power weapons that could devastate entire systems, Navera's red light darkened ominously, or their attempt will fail catastrophically, potentially taking this entire sector with it. Thea whistled low. No pressure then. Just the fate of several civilizations hanging in the balance. She paused, an idea beginning to form. Tell me something, these containment fields, they're designed specifically to hold stellar energy, right? Yes, Solarius replied, curiosity evident in its mental voice. They use crystalline matrices to create a perfect resonance that contains our power. Perfect resonance, Thea repeated, grinning. You know, resonance is a funny thing. Push it just a little too far in either direction, and instead of containment, you get catastrophic failure. And if there's one thing humans are good at, it's pushing things just a little too far. The stellar being's light patterns changed, showing interest. What are you suggesting, Commander? Celestis asked. I'm suggesting, Thea said, pulling a small crystal she'd palmed during processing from her boot, that maybe it's time to teach our hosts about the dangers of playing with stars. But first, I need to understand exactly how these containment fields work. Something tells me you three have had plenty of time to study them. Over the next hours, Thea received a crash course in stellar physics and crystalline technology that would have made her old university professors weep with joy. The stellar beings, she discovered, weren't just powerful, they were brilliant, having spent their imprisonment analyzing every facet of their confinement. The fields operate on a triple helix resonance pattern, Solarius explained, projecting images directly into Thea's mind. Each layer reinforces the others, creating a stable containment matrix. But stability depends on precise calibration, Navera added. The slightest disruption in any layer could cascade through the entire system, Thea finished, her grin widening. And I'm betting they never designed these fields to account for something as insignificant as human interference. What exactly do you have in mind? Celestis asked, ultraviolet light rippling with intrigue. Thea held up the stolen crystal. First, we're going to need to understand exactly how these crystals transmit energy. Then, we're going to give the Vraxians a lesson in human ingenuity and stellar physics they'll never forget. As she outlined her initial thoughts, the stellar being's light patterns shifted from skepticism to interest to something approaching excitement. It was a crazy plan, the kind that could either save multiple civilizations or end in spectacular failure. In other words, Thea thought, it was exactly the kind of plan humans excelled at. It's either brilliant or insane, Navarra observed, red light fluctuating with uncertainty. In my experience, Thea replied, already starting to scratch calculations into the floor with her crystal, the best plans are usually both. Now, who's ready to show these living gemstones why you should never underestimate humans or stars? The answering pulses of light from 3 stellar beings would have sent the Vraxian guards running for cover, had they been there to see it. The game was about to change, and the Vraxians had no idea they'd just created their own worst nightmare, a human scientist with nothing to lose and 3 stars as allies. Breaking the code. First rule of prison breaks, Thea announced, carefully etching diagrams into the floor with her stolen crystal, is understanding that every security system has 3 weaknesses, patterns, pride, and people. She glanced up at her luminous companions. The Vraxians have all 3 in abundance. Solarius hovered closer, blue-white radiance dimming to better observe her work. Explain these weaknesses, Commander. Patterns, Thea began, marking out the guard rotation schedule she'd memorized, are the routines we've observed. The Vraxians are crystalline beings, they literally think in rigid structures. Pride? She tapped the crystal against the floor. They're so convinced of their technological superiority that they've never considered someone might understand their systems well enough to subvert them. And people? Celestis asked, ultraviolet light rippling with curiosity. People, or in this case, crystalline entities, make mistakes. They overlook small details, dismiss unlikely possibilities. Thea's grin turned predatory. Like assuming a human scientist couldn't possibly understand their precious resonance technology. Over the next several hours, Thea worked with the stellar beings to craft a plan that would make Earth's greatest prison breakers proud. Each being contributed their unique knowledge and abilities, creating a strategy that was as elegant as it was audacious. The containment fields, Navarra explained, red light pulsing as they projected detailed energy patterns into Thea's mind, operate on 7 distinct resonance frequencies. Each must remain perfectly calibrated. Thea nodded, adding to her growing diagram. And if those frequencies were to shift, even slightly, the entire system would attempt to compensate, Solarius finished, blue-white light flickering with excitement. But they've never had to compensate for multiple simultaneous disruptions. Exactly, Thea said, standing back to admire their work. The Vraxians designed this prison to contain stellar beings trying to break out. They never considered what would happen if those stellar beings worked together, with human guidance, to break it from within. The plan they developed was intricate, requiring precise timing and coordination. Celestis would create a series of ultraviolet pulses that would interfere with the facility's sensor systems. Simultaneously, Navarra would generate specific frequency patterns that would force the containment fields to constantly recalibrate. Meanwhile, Solarius would channel energy in a way that mimicked normal stellar behavior, keeping their captors from realizing anything was amiss. The key, Thea explained, adding final details to their blueprint, is making them think they're in control until the very last moment. Every time they adjust the fields to compensate for one disruption, they'll actually be weakening their defenses against the next. But won't they detect these changes? Solarius asked, light patterns showing concern. Thea's smile widened. That's where human ingenuity comes in. We're not going to hide these changes, we're going to make them look like exactly what the Vraxians expect to see. They're studying stellar behavior, right? So we'll give them stellar behavior. Just, not quite the kind they're expecting. She spent the next hour teaching the stellar beings about human concepts of misdirection and psychological warfare. The Vraxians would be so focused on collecting data about what they thought was normal stellar activity that they wouldn't realize they were being played until it was too late. Remember, Thea instructed, when they detect Celestus's ultraviolet fluctuations, they'll adjust the containment fields to compensate. That's when Navera creates a harmonic resonance pattern that looks like a natural response to containment. While I maintain a steady energy output that suggests we're being successfully contained, Solarius finished, their light brightening with understanding. Precisely. Each adjustment they make will create a new vulnerability. By the time they realize what's happening, Thea let the sentence hang. They will have compromised their own security, Celestus concluded, ultraviolet patterns shifting rapidly with excitement. As they refined their plan, Thea began to appreciate just how much the Vraxians had underestimated both humanity and their stellar prisoners. These beings weren't just powerful, they were intelligent, adaptable, and more than capable of understanding complex strategy. There's one more thing, Thea said, adding a final series of calculations to their diagram. When we trigger the cascade failure, we need to ensure it doesn't cause the catastrophic reaction the Vraxians are worried about. I didn't come here to save civilizations by destroying them. Navera's red light pulsed thoughtfully. We can modulate our energy releases to prevent a chain reaction. It will require precise control, but together, Thea agreed, we can show the Vraxians exactly why they should have thought twice about combining human creativity with stellar power. They spent the remaining hours practicing their timing, refining their energy patterns, and preparing for every possible complication. Thea taught them human military hand signals, modified to work with their luminous forms, creating a way to communicate that the Vraxians wouldn't understand. Tomorrow, Thea announced as they finalized their preparations, we begin. Remember, timing is everything. We're not just breaking out, we're going to change how the Vraxians think about humans and stellar beings forever. The chamber filled with pulses of red, blue-white, and ultraviolet light as her companions signaled their agreement. In the shadows of their prison cell, a human scientist and 3 stellar beings prepared to teach the Vraxian Empire a lesson about the power of cooperation and the danger of assumptions. The Vraxians had created their own worst nightmare, a prison where the supposedly primitive human could learn directly from stellar beings, and where stellar beings could learn human ingenuity. Tomorrow would prove just how costly that mistake had been. Systems of chaos. The prison's crystalline corridors hummed with their usual resonance as the guard shift changed. Thea gave her stellar companions a subtle nod. Showtime. Celestus began first, their ultraviolet form dimming almost imperceptibly as they sent precisely calibrated pulses through the containment field. In the control room, sensors began registering minute fluctuations in stellar activity, nothing alarming, just the kind of variations the Vraxians had come to expect while studying their prisoners. Phase 1 initiated, Celestus communicated mentally. Their sensors are responding exactly as predicted. Through her stolen crystal, Thea could feel the facility's systems beginning to adjust, exactly as they'd planned. Navera, you're up. Remember, make it look natural. The red stellar beings' form rippled as they began generating their own energy patterns, creating harmonics that interfaced with Celestus's pulses. To the Vraxians' instruments, it would appear as simple stellar interaction, 2 confined stars responding to each other's presence. Alarms began chiming softly throughout the facility, but not the urgent kind. These were the alerts of scientists being notified of interesting data, of systems automatically adjusting to expected phenomena. Thea smiled as she watched the containment field's crystalline structure begin to shift, compensating for what it perceived as normal stellar behavior. They're increasing power to the secondary containment grid, Solarius reported, their blue-white radiance steady and controlled. Just as you predicted, Commander. Thea nodded, mentally counting down. Perfect. They think they're observing a natural stellar phenomenon. Time for Phase 2. Celestis, begin your second sequence. The ultraviolet being's energy patterns shifted, creating interference patterns that rippled through the facility's sensor network. Simultaneously, Nevera's outputs began to fluctuate in a way that seemed random but was actually precisely calculated to stress specific points in the containment field. Throughout the facility, Vraxian scientists crowded around their monitoring stations, excitedly recording what they believed to be unprecedented stellar behavior. None of them realized they were watching their own security systems being systematically dismantled. Alert, the facility's automated systems announced, containment field resonance experiencing nominal variations. Adjusting parameters. They're doing our work for us, Thea grinned as the Vraxians' own safety protocols began making exactly the changes they needed. Solarius, ready for your part. The blue-white stellar being pulsed in acknowledgement. Standing by, Commander. The next phase was the trickiest. As the facility's systems struggled to maintain containment of what appeared to be increasingly erratic stellar behavior, Solarius began introducing their own energy patterns that exactly matched the crystalline resonance of the prison itself. Alarms began blaring in earnest now, but by the time the Vraxians realized something was wrong, it was already too late. The containment fields, designed to prevent stellar energy from escaping, were now resonating with stellar energy at their own fundamental frequency. Warning, the facility computer announced, its crystalline tones taking on an edge of panic, containment field integrity compromised. Multiple system failures detected. In the control room, Vraxian operators frantically tried to restore control, but each adjustment they made only amplified the cascading failures. Their own protocols, designed to protect against stellar threats, were now working against them. Celestis, Nevera, Thea called out, begin harmonic convergence. Solarius, prepare for the pulse. The three stellar beings moved in perfect synchronization, their combined energies creating patterns that made the very structure of the prison resonate. Crystalline walls began to sing with otherworldly harmonies as the facility's own architecture betrayed it. Full facility lockdown initiated, the computer announced desperately. Emergency containment protocols engaged. Now! Thea shouted. Solarius released their prepared pulse of energy, perfectly calibrated to match the resonant frequency of the facility's crystals. Throughout the prison, containment fields shattered, security systems failed, and doors crystallized into dust. But instead of the catastrophic release of stellar energy the Vraxians had feared, what followed was a precisely controlled cascade of system failures. Each stellar being modulated their energy release exactly as practiced, creating a wave of disruption that disabled the facility's systems without destroying them. All containment systems offline, the computer reported helplessly. Security protocols non-responsive. Facility control compromised. Thea stepped through the ruins of their cell's doorway, her stellar companions floating beside her in their full radiant glory. Through the facility's compromised communication system, she broadcast her message. Attention Vraxian Facility Command. This is Commander Thea Blackwood. As you can see, your containment systems have been completely neutralized. However, you may notice that your facility is still intact. That's not an accident. Through the corridors, they encountered no resistance. Vraxian guards and scientists pressed themselves against walls, their crystalline forms trembling as three unconfined stellar beings and one very satisfied human passed by. You designed this prison assuming stellar beings would try to break out through brute force, Thea continued her broadcast. You never considered they might work together, or that a supposedly primitive human might understand your technology well enough to turn it against you. They reached the facility's main control center, where the Vraxian commander's facets had turned a pale, frightened white. Impossible, it chimed weakly. Our systems were perfect. Perfect is predictable, Thea replied, holding up her stolen crystal. And predictable is vulnerable. Now, about those escorts to your spaceport. As they made their way to freedom, Thea couldn't help but add one final message: "Oh, and you might want to update your research on human capabilities. We're a bit more advanced than you thought." Behind them, the facility's crystals still sang with the lingering harmonies of their escape, a symphony of freedom composed by stellar beings and orchestrated by human ingenuity. Legacy of change. The stolen Vraxian ship hummed with crystalline resonance as they cleared the facility's gravity well. Through the viewport, Thea watched the prison complex growing smaller, its once imposing structure now serving as a monument to the power of unexpected cooperation. "Commander," Solarius called out, their blue-white radiance illuminating the ship's bridge, "we're detecting multiple energy signatures from the facility. It appears we inspired something." On the ship's sensors, Thea watched as other containment cells throughout the prison began experiencing unexpected resonance failures. Apparently, their escape had provided quite the demonstration for other inmates. "Should we assist them?" Celestis asked, their ultraviolet form rippling with concern. Thea studied the tactical display, a slow smile spreading across her face. "You know what? I think we should. After all, we did just write the handbook on how to break out of a Vraxian prison." "Not to mention," Navarra added, red light pulsing with amusement, "it would be a shame to waste such a perfect opportunity to teach the Vraxians an even bigger lesson." Thea opened a broadcast channel to all frequencies within the facility's range. "Attention all inmates and staff of the Vraxian Stellar Containment Facility. This is Commander Thea Blackwood, the human who just walked out of your maximum security cell with 3 stellar beings. I see some of you are feeling inspired." Throughout the prison, both guards and inmates paused to listen. In their barricaded command center, the Vraxian leadership felt their crystalline forms vibrate with dread as Thea continued. "To the prison administration, you have exactly 10 minutes to begin an orderly evacuation of your staff. Yes, your entire security system is compromised. No, you can't fix it. My stellar friends made sure of that." As if to emphasize her point, Solarius sent a carefully controlled pulse of energy that made every crystal in the facility sing in harmony. Celestis added their own ultraviolet patterns, creating interference that made the facility's remaining sensors display impossible readings. "But Commander," one of the Vraxian officers protested over the channel, "these prisoners are dangerous. You don't understand what you're doing." "Actually," Thea replied, "I understand exactly what I'm doing. I'm showing you why assuming other species are inferior is a really bad idea. For example, did you know that humans have extensive experience in prison reform?" The facility erupted into controlled chaos as Thea and her stellar companions guided the mass exodus. Using the techniques they developed during their own escape, they helped coordinate the release of prisoners while ensuring the safe evacuation of staff. It was a delicate balance, but one that demonstrated just how precisely they could control the situation. "Think of this as a learning opportunity," Thea broadcast as escape pods carrying former prison staff launched toward the nearest Vraxian outpost. Lesson 1, Diversity is Strength. Lesson 2, Cooperation beats control. And Lesson 3, Never, ever underestimate species you don't understand. As the last of the staff evacuated and the prisoners organized themselves, Thea worked with her stellar companions to establish a temporary council to manage the transition. Species that had been enemies under Vraxian control now found themselves working together, inspired by the example of a human and 3 stellar beings. "You never intended to just escape, did you?" Solarius observed as they watched the facility transform from a prison into something new. "Let's just say I believe in thorough problem solving," Thea replied. "Taking down one prison is good. Changing an entire system's perspective on interspecies cooperation? That's better." Over the next several hours, they helped establish communication channels with various homeworlds, arrange transportation for freed prisoners, and set up protocols to prevent any violence or chaos during the transition. The facility that had once represented oppression was becoming a symbol of peaceful revolution. "The Vraxian High Council is requesting communication," Celestis announced, their ultraviolet patterns showing amusement. They seem rather confused about how their most secure facility just became an interspecies cooperation center. Thea straightened her uniform. Well, we shouldn't keep them waiting. Time to negotiate the terms of a new relationship between crystalline, stellar, and human societies. The communication that followed would be remembered in multiple civilizations' histories. Thea, flanked by her stellar companions, presented the Vraxian High Council with a choice: adapt to a new reality of interspecies cooperation, or face the combined ingenuity of humans and stellar beings across the galaxy. Your containment facilities are based on the assumption that different species can't work together effectively, Thea explained to the assembled council. We've just proved that assumption isn't just wrong, it's dangerously wrong. So, shall we discuss how we move forward? The changes that followed would reshape galactic society. The Vraxians, faced with undeniable proof of their errors, began a gradual but significant reformation of their approach to other species. The facility was officially repurposed as the galaxy's first interspecies cooperation and research center, where humans, stellar beings, and even Vraxians work together to advance their collective knowledge. You know, Thea said months later, watching a Vraxian crystalline scientist working alongside a stellar being to study space-time phenomena, sometimes the best way to change a system isn't to destroy it, but to show it a better way of existing. Navera's red light pulsed in agreement. The humans have a saying, don't they? About teaching people to fish. Give a person a fish, and you feed them for a day. Teach them to fish, and you feed them for a lifetime, Thea quoted. Or in this case, show an empire a better way, and you change the galaxy forever. The facility's crystals hummed with a new resonance now, one that spoke not of containment and control, but of cooperation and discovery. And if anyone noticed that the facility's systems still played Earth music whenever someone accessed the main computer, well, that was just Thea's way of signing her work.